Damon was a typical 13-year-old boy, curious and adventurous, who loved exploring the wooded areas around Orchard Hills Middle School in northern Idaho. Known for his inquisitive nature, he often found himself in trouble for wandering off or poking his nose where it didn't belong. One afternoon, while the other kids were playing sports or chatting, Damon noticed something odd. Behind the school, hidden by overgrown bushes and tall trees, was an old, rusted door partially buried in the ground. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Damon's curiosity was piqued. He glanced around to make sure no one was watching, then approached the door. With a few hard pulls, the door creaked open, revealing a dark stairway descending into the earth. Damon hesitated, considering the possible dangers. But his curiosity got the better of him. He pulled out his phone, switched on the flashlight, and cautiously made his way down the stairs. The air grew colder and mustier with each step. As he reached the bottom, he found himself in a narrow corridor lined with damp, stone walls. The corridor led to a large, dimly lit room. Damon's heart raced as he heard a faint humming sound coming from deeper within. He followed the sound, moving as quietly as possible. The hallway opened into a cavernous chamber filled with strange, flickering lights and an array of bizarre machinery. Damon's eyes widened in horror as he saw what lay in the center of the room. Large, translucent tanks filled with a greenish liquid stood in rows, each containing what appeared to be a grotesque alien hybrid creature. They had elongated limbs, bulbous eyes, and skin that seemed to ripple and change color. Damon's stomach churned as he noticed the tiny forms of children suspended in the tanks, seemingly unconscious. His mind raced with questions. How had these creatures come to be here? Who was responsible for this? He took a few steps closer, trying to get a better look, when he heard footsteps approaching. Panicking, he ducked behind a large piece of machinery and peered out. A tall figure in a lab coat entered the room, followed by two more men wearing dark uniforms. They spoke in hushed tones, but Damon could make out bits of their conversation. New batch of children arrived last night. Accelerating the hybridization process. Governor's orders. Damon's blood ran cold. The governor? He struggled to make sense of what he was hearing. The men continued their conversation, oblivious to his presence. Make sure the specimens are ready for transport by next week, the man in the lab coat said. We can't afford any more delays. Damon's heart pounded in his chest. He needed to get out of there and tell someone, but how? As he slowly backed away, his foot hit a metal object, causing a loud clanging noise. The men in the room froze and turned towards the sound. Who's there? One of them barked, pulling out a flashlight and sweeping it across the room. Damon held his breath, praying they wouldn't find him. The light passed over his hiding spot, and the men moved closer. Just as they were about to discover him, a loud alarm blared throughout the underground facility. The men cursed and rushed out of the room, leaving Damon alone once more. Seizing the opportunity, Damon made a dash for the exit. He ran up the stairs and out into the daylight, his mind racing with what he had just witnessed. He knew he couldn't go to the authorities. If the governor was involved, who could he trust? Damon decided to confide in his best friend, Jake. They met after school at their usual spot by the old oak tree. Damon recounted everything he had seen and heard, his voice trembling with fear and urgency. Jake listened, his eyes wide with disbelief. We have to do something, he said. We can't just let this continue. The two friends hatched a plan to gather more evidence. That night, armed with their phones and a couple of flashlights, they sneaked back to the school and into the underground facility. This time, they took pictures and videos of the tanks, the creatures, and the machinery. As they were about to leave, they heard voices approaching again. Damon and Jake hid, their hearts pounding. They watched as the same men from before entered the room, along with a new figure, an older man with a commanding presence. Damon recognized him from the news, Governor Reynolds. We've had a breach, the governor said, his voice cold and authoritative. Someone was here earlier today. Find out who it was and make sure it doesn't happen again. Damon and Jake exchanged a terrified glance. They had to get out of there before they were discovered. As they carefully made their way back to the stairs, they heard footsteps behind them. Jake turned to see one of the men pointing a flashlight in their direction. "There," the man shouted. "Stop them." Damon and Jake sprinted up the stairs, their fear giving them a burst of speed. They burst out of the door and into the night, running as fast as they could. They didn't stop until they reached Jake's house, collapsing on the front porch, gasping for breath. "We have to go to the media," Jake said between breaths. "They'll believe us if we show them the pictures and videos." Damon nodded, but he felt a growing sense of dread. If the governor was involved, how far would he go to keep this secret? They agreed to meet the next morning and go to the local newspaper office. As the sun rose, Damon felt a glimmer of hope. They had the evidence, and they were doing the right thing. But as he approached Jake's house, he saw a black car parked out front. Two men in dark suits were talking to Jake's parents on the porch. Jake's father pointed towards the backyard, and Damon's heart sank. He ran to the backyard, only to find Jake being shoved into the car, struggling against his captors. "Damon!" Jake shouted. "Run!" Before Damon could react, one of the men spotted him. "There's the other one," he yelled. Damon turned and fled, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He darted through backyards, jumped fences, and weaved through alleys, trying to lose his pursuers. He didn't stop until he was deep in the woods, far from any houses or roads. Breathing heavily, Damon tried to process what had just happened. Jake had been taken, and now they were after him too. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. He pulled out his phone and checked the pictures and videos, making sure they were still there. They were his only hope. As night fell, Damon found a secluded spot to rest. He knew he couldn't stay in one place for long, but he needed a plan. He thought about the underground facility, the alien hybrids, and the missing children. He couldn't let this go on, but he was just a kid against powerful people. His phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number. He opened it and his blood ran cold. "We have your friend. If you want to see him again, come back to the school. Alone." Damon's hands trembled as he read the message. He knew it was a trap, but he couldn't abandon Jake. He had to try to save him. He stood up, took a deep breath, and began making his way back to Orchard Hills Middle School, knowing that he was walking into the lion's den. As he approached the school, the rusted door loomed ahead, a dark portal to the horrors below. Damon steeled himself and descended the stairs once more. The corridor was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. He reached the large room, now brightly lit, and saw Jake tied to a chair in the center. Governor Reynolds stood beside him, a sinister smile on his face. "Welcome back, Damon," he said. "I knew you'd come. You're brave, but foolish." Damon took a step forward, his heart pounding. "Let him go," he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. The governor chuckled. "You've caused us a lot of trouble, boy. But it's over now." Before Damon could react, strong hands grabbed him from behind, dragging him towards another tank. He struggled, but the men were too powerful. As they forced him into the tank, he caught a final glimpse of Jake, his eyes filled with fear and helplessness. The tank door closed with a hiss, and Damon felt a cold liquid rising around him. The last thing he saw before darkness enveloped him was the governor's triumphant grin.